Well, good evening. And this is lesson 10.6. This is the last one we're actually going to do in this chapter on integers. And it just gives us a really good use for these positive and negative numbers that we've been talking about. And specifically, it is using them in a coordinate plane. Now, we don't necessarily have to have negative numbers to do x and y graphing, but unless we do use negatives, we're going to be stuck in the first quadrant. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into this lesson. But this is one of the main uses of integers. So let's go ahead and dive into it. There's a lot of different names for a coordinate plane. You just saw on the front video. It's sometimes called an XY plane. It's also sometimes called a Cartesian plane, and that's in honor of a French mathematician by the name of Descartes. Okay? Okay? And he did a lot of work taking Euclidean geometry and putting it on an XY plane. So when we talk about an XY plane, what we're talking about is we have a horizontal axis that we call X, and we have a vertical axis that we talk about as Y. And what we do is we do ordered pairs. Now this is very important. An ordered pair means that it matters what order we put the numbers in. So when we do an ordered pair for a point, when we're graphing a point, we always put the x coordinate first and the y coordinate second. So if I see a point like 5, 2, it means I go to the right 5 units. I always start right here at 0, 0. Okay, and as you'll see in a second, that is called the origin, and that is the point 0, 0. Both the x and the y are 0. All right, so 5, 2 means I go 5 to the right, and I go up 2. So the point 5, 2 would be right about here. Okay? Now, some people, the most common mistake people make is they'll go over 2 and up 5. In other words, they confuse which number means which. Now, this is a point, if you've gone over 2, up 5, you've actually gone over an x of 2, and you've gone up a y of 5. So this is the point 2, 5, not the point 5, 2. And again, you can see the difference between the two. Over 2, up 5 versus right 5, up 2. Okay, so let's formalize this a little bit more. Again, remember the term ordered pair. Okay, when we have the x and the y-axis, notice we've got the x-axis here, the y-axis here. Again, they've labeled the origin. But if I draw the x and y-axis, you notice that I'd kind of divide the space up into 4 corners. Those corners are called quadrants. Quad because there's 4 of them. And we start up in the top right corner where both the x and the y, if you look at the axes down here, this is a positive x and a positive y. So both the x and the y are positive numbers, and that puts us in the first quadrant. All right, so continuing around counterclockwise, you notice the next quadrant is quadrant 2. And if you look down here, you notice that all of the x values are negative. Okay, so in quadrant 2, we're talking about x's that are negative and y's that are positive. Okay, continuing around, when we get to quadrant 3, you'll notice that both the x and the y are both negative. And then finally in quadrant 4, we're back to having positive x's but not positive y's. And that'll put me in quadrant 4. So we go around quadrant 1, 2, 3, 4. And a couple quick ways to remember this. First of all, we always use Roman numerals. Second of all, we always start in the easy quadrant. That's where everything's positive. And we always go counterclockwise. Okay? So just remember 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. All right, let's go ahead and practice graphing a few points and taking points and coming up with their ordered pairs. So let's start with the point right here. This will be a point. Oops, sorry about that. Okay, so right here where I just put that dot, okay, what is the ordered pair of that dot? All right, so let's take a look at it. We're going to write it as x, comma, y. So the x-coordinate is going back and forth on the x-axis. So we're going to count back 2 units to the left. So the x is -2. And the y is up 3 units. So it's -2, up 3. Okay, and this should probably remind you a little bit of slope. But this time we are going to go in alphabetical order. So the first number is the x-coordinate. The second number is the y-coordinate. Okay? And actually I said that it reminds you of slope. This is actually something that we're going to do with it next year. All right, let's take another one. Let me give you a point and you graph it. So let's graph the point 5, -3. And I put it down here close to quadrant 4 because that's where it's going to appear. Okay? So I'm going to make a little tiny circle because it's a little easier for me to draw without picking up the picture that's in the background. So 5, -3 means come over here to 5, right there, and go down to -3. Okay, and if I come across to where those two intersect, well, that didn't work so well. I'm going to get a point right about there. Oh, no, I lied. Sorry. Let's try that again. 5, -3 is going to be right about there. And that is the point 5, -3. Again, remember, always the first number is the x, that's the left and the right, and the second number is the y, the -3. Okay? One more. Let's do a point right here. Okay? What would the coordinates of this point be? And again, remember, we're doing x first, then y. So the x is going to be -5, and the y, how far do I go up or down on that one? And you don't actually see the number here, but here's -1, and here's +1. You can't really see it because it's kind of got buried. But it's right in the middle, so that's actually the y coordinate of 0. We don't go up or down at all. Okay? So those are ordered pairs, and this is just a really good way to use positive and negative numbers. So, some things to remember for the quiz tomorrow. Make sure you remember your quadrant numbers. Okay? So if I ask you what quadrant is in the bottom left corner, you ought to be able to say quadrant 3. Okay? Or if I ask you to describe the x and the y values, are they positive or negative in different quadrants? You ought to be able to do that. Okay? All right, well, that's pretty much all I have for you. We will be practicing these in class tomorrow, and we'll be using graph paper. So I will see you in class tomorrow, and we will practice. Have a good night.